You meet someone new. Before they say a single word, you've already decided something about them. Can you trust this person? Your brain answers before you've even finished shaking their hand. It happens faster than thought, faster than language, faster than anything you'd call a decision. But the real answer to where this instinct comes from is far stranger than first impressions matter. You weren't taught to do this, you were built to do this. Somewhere in your skull, a part of your brain has been scanning faces since before you could form a memory. It doesn't wait for context, it doesn't wait for evidence. It looks at the shape of a jaw, the angle of an eyebrow, the distance between two eyes, and it renders a verdict. Friend or threat, safe or dangerous, trustworthy or not. And it does this in a tenth of a second. In 2006, a psychologist named Alexander Todorov ran an experiment at Princeton that would quietly reshape how scientists understood human judgment. He showed people photographs of unfamiliar faces for just 100 milliseconds. Less time than a camera flash, less time than you have to read the sentence. Then he asked a simple question: was this person trustworthy? The answers barely changed when people were given more time to look. A tenth of a second was enough. Your brain had already made up its mind, and giving it longer didn't change the verdict. It just made people more confident in a decision they'd already made before they were aware of making it. Why would evolution build a system this fast? Because for most of human history, hesitation was expensive. If you lived in a small band of hunter-gatherers, every face you encountered carried real stakes. A stranger walking toward your camp wasn't an abstraction. They were either kin or ally or threat, and you had seconds, not minutes, to figure out which. Your ancestors who paused too long to think it over sometimes didn't get a second chance to think at all. So the brain built a shortcut, a fast, crude, emotional read of the face that didn't require conscious reasoning at all. This is where the strangeness begins. The features your brain associates with trustworthiness have almost nothing to do with actual honesty. Wide eyes, raised inner eyebrows, a face shaped more like a circle than a long oval. These are the same features present on an infant's face. Round, soft, non-threatening. Your brain isn't reading character. It's reading a resemblance to babyhood and mistaking that resemblance for safety. Meanwhile, faces with lower brows, sharper angles, and more masculine bone structure get coded as less trustworthy almost instantly, regardless of who that person actually is. None of this correlates with whether someone will actually keep their word. Researchers have tested this directly. People shown faces rated as trustworthy were no more likely to behave honestly in cooperative games than people with untrustworthy faces. The signal your brain swears by carries almost no real information. It's a guess dressed up as certainty, and your nervous system delivers that guess with the full emotional force of a fact. Think about how strange that actually is. You would never accept a verdict this confident from any other part of your reasoning. You wouldn't trust a stranger's resume after reading it for a tenth of a second. You wouldn't trust a contract after glancing at one word, but the face gets a pass. The face gets believed instantly with no cross-examination because the part of your brain handling it doesn't report to the part of you capable of doubting it. There's a name researchers use for a related pattern, the halo effect. It's the tendency to assume that one positive trait, like an attractive or trustworthy face, comes bundled with a whole set of other positive traits. Intelligence, kindness, competence, none of these are visible in a face. Your brain invents them anyway, filling in the blanks with assumptions it never bothered to verify. This is why attractive defendants, in study after study, tend to receive lighter sentences from juries who insist they were judging only the facts. This is why job candidates with competent-looking faces get hired more often, even when their qualifications are identical to someone else's on paper. The face isn't just informing the judgment. In many cases, it's quietly overriding it. You're not the only one making split-second judgments from almost nothing. A psychologist named Nalini Ambady, working with Robert Rosenthal, studied something called thin slicing. They showed people just a few seconds of silent video, no sound, no context of college professors teaching. Then they asked viewers to rate how effective each teacher was. The ratings from a 10-second silent clip matched the ratings from an entire semester of student evaluations. 10 seconds, no words, just posture, expression, movement. Your brain doesn't need a conversation to form a confident, lasting impression of another person. It needs a glance. Ambady and Rosenthal ran the experiment again, trimming the clips down further. 6 seconds, then 2 seconds. The ratings barely move. Whatever judgment your brain forms about a person, it forms almost immediately and then spends the rest of the interaction quietly defending that first impression rather than revising it. This is sometimes called confirmation bias, but it starts somewhere more primitive than reasoning. It starts with a face viewed for less time than it takes to say your own name. This is unsettling once you sit with it. Somewhere right now, people are forming permanent opinions of you based on a window of time too short for you to even finish a sentence. So if faces aren't reliable evidence, why do they feel so convincing? Because the brain didn't evolve to be accurate. It evolved to be fast enough to keep you alive. Accuracy was a luxury your ancestors often couldn't afford. A face that triggered a flicker of unease, even a false one, was worth listening to if the cost of ignoring it was your life. Evolution doesn't reward the most truthful instinct, it rewards the instinct that kept enough of your ancestors breathing long enough to pass it on. There's a deeper layer to this, and it involves expression, not just structure. Charles Darwin was one of the first to argue that facial expressions weren't culturally invented. He believed certain expressions were universal, wired into the species itself, not learned like a language. A century later, a researcher named Paul Ekman traveled to remote, isolated communities, places with little to no contact with Western media, and tested whether people there recognized the same emotional expressions as everyone else. They did. Anger looked like anger. Fear looked like fear. A face contorted in disgust meant disgust. Whether the person reading it lived in New York or in a remote village that had never seen a photograph before, your face is not a private canvas. It's a broadcast system, shaped by millions of years of pressure to communicate before language existed. Long before your ancestors had words for danger, they had faces that could show it. The eyebrows that shoot up in surprise, the nostrils that flare in anger. These aren't choices. They're inherited signals, and the brain reading them is just as ancient as the brain sending them. So two ancient systems are running constantly underneath every interaction you have. One face transmitting, one face receiving. Neither one asking permission from the conscious mind first. Here's the twist that makes this stranger still. You can be fooled by a face on purpose. People with genuinely warm intentions can look cold simply because of bone structure they didn't choose. People who mean harm can look gentle because their face happens to be shaped like an infant's. Your fastest, most confident judgment system is also one of the easiest to exploit because it was never built for precision. It was built for speed. Con artists have understood this instinctively for centuries, long before anyone had a name for thin slicing or trustworthiness ratings. A warm smile. Soft eyes, a symmetrical, approachable face. These tools work not because they prove anything about character, but because they hijack a judgment system that was never checking for proof in the first place. Now think about how often you're making this exact judgment today. You scroll through a dating profile and form an opinion in less than a second. You glance at a stranger's photo before an interview and feel a flicker of like or dislike before you've read a single line of their resume. You open a video call and decide, almost instantly, whether you like this new coworker based on nothing but the geometry of their face on a screen. None of this technology existed when your brain's face-reading system evolved. And yet the system fires exactly the same way it did for your ancestors standing at the edge of a fire, watching a stranger approach out of the dark. There's an entire economy now built around exploiting this ancient circuit. Headshot photographers who know exactly which angle softens a jawline. Dating apps where a single thumbnail decides whether anyone ever reads your bio at all. Political consultants who test which candidate photo reads as more competent before a single policy has been mentioned. None of these people are inventing a new vulnerability in you. They're aiming very precisely at one that's been there since before your species had a written language. And it isn't only strangers shaping your judgment of them. It's you, shaping how strangers judge you, often without realizing it. The photo you choose for a profile, the expression you hold for a thumbnail, you are managing an ancient signal system, using tools that didn't exist a generation ago, instinctively trying to trip the same trust circuit in someone else's brain that once decided, in a tenth of a second, whether your ancestors lived to see the next sunrise. Is that fair to the people you're judging? Probably not. Is it fair to you when someone else does the same to your face? Also not. But fairness was never the goal. Survival was, knowing this doesn't shut the system off. You can't choose not to form a snap judgment of a new face. The circuitry runs automatically, the way your pupils contract in bright light, whether you want them to or not. What you can do is notice the moment it happens. Notice the flicker of trust or suspicion arriving before any actual evidence has. Notice that the verdict your gut hands you in a tenth of a second was built for a world of firelight and footsteps in the dark, not for a glowing rectangle showing you a stranger's profile picture. The next time a face earns your instant trust or your instant suspicion, ask yourself where that feeling actually came from. Not from what that person has done, not from anything they've said, just from the curve of a brow, the width of two eyes, a pattern your brain inherited from ancestors who never met them either. You meet someone new, and once again, before a single word is spoken, an ancient machine inside you has already decided whether to trust the only thing it ever really had to go on, a face.